and Alyssa Green will talk about this. Scott Leslie is the systems manager of the BC Libraries Cooperative. He says that he sent his first electronic message in 1979 at the age of 10 and has been online pretty much continuously since then. Now, I'm hoping he can be offline for part of this presentation anyway. Alyssa Green is the manager of digital services at Vancouver Public Library, and she says she enjoys following tech trends across the spectrum, from changes in digital publishing to applications for VR use in public libraries.
And of course, we come prepared with a few tech troubles, so. All right, hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'm just going to give a heads up that I have a terrible head cold, so if I pause and stare blankly into space for brief moments as I'm catching my thoughts, please forgive me. I'm still here and I'm going to do my very best anyway. So, as we discussed, we're here to talk about authentication and some of the privacy implications associated with it. I'm going to start by talking about VPL's thoughts on SIP2 authentication protocol, which I'm now just going to call SIP for ease, some of the ways we've dealt with vendor requests to implement SIP, and then I'm going to pass you over to Scott, who's going to talk about the co-op's approach to handling this type of authentication request. Okay. So I want to start by ensuring we're all have the same common groundwork that we're approaching SIP from. SIP is an authentication protocol that allows vendors to confirm that users can log onto our e-resources. The problem is it was designed for use in a closed-loop system. It was designed to communicate between our ILS and a self-service checkout in-house. So SIP works by verifying private patron data, such as name, email address, phone number, and age, and was only, as I said, designed to be used in-house. Recently, vendors have brought it forward as a suggested protocol for digital resources, which means that that information is now available outside on the larger web. At VPL, we have chosen not to implement SIP because we believe it shares more information than is appropriate under BC's Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, FIPA. So FIPA sets out the privacy rights of individuals as they relate to the public sector, including libraries. It defines the terms under which we, as public sector organizations, can share, collect, and disseminate our users' information. So again, personal information is anything that uniquely identifies an individual, including name, age, phone number, email address, account status, borrower history, all of that type of stuff. As libraries, we have reasons to collect this information. We use it to provide access to programs, we use it to enable our users to borrow books. So there are a lot of reasons that we need this information, but we don't collect it for the purpose of disclosing to vendors. And so that's the big issue for us. So within this framework of FIPA to guide us, as I've said, we're concerned that SIP is not compliant with the spirit and intent of the privacy legislation. So vendors have recently brought forth SIP as an authentication method. And for vendors, this might seem like a logical choice, because why wouldn't an authentication protocol that was designed for libraries be acceptable to us? Again, as I said, it was never designed for use on the open web. So this is where the difference comes in. And it transmits way more data to a vendor than we believe is appropriate. For a vendor to allow a person to access a resource, all that they need to confirm is that the borrower is eligible, i.e. they live in the geographic region that they have defined, and that the barcode and PIN verify. When we use SIP as the authentication method, the message transmits all of that other data I've talked about. Now, vendors have argued that they aren't looking at this data or that they won't use this data, but at VPL we feel that that is totally irrelevant, and it is against best practice to be sending that information out. So to this point, we have looked for alternate solutions. Getting back on track. We have not implemented SIP protocol with any of our vendors. This does require significantly more work on our end, but we really believe that it is critical that we be a role model for best practices in complying with privacy legislation. It can be really really challenging for vendors to understand our reluctance to use SIP. There are the usual issues with them understanding our obligations under the privacy landscape, and these are further complicated by the fact that SIP implementation is not the same for everyone. So at VPL, we're on Horizon, but libraries that use the Symphony ILS are actually able to strip down a SIP message to only send what they want. That's not an option for us. So vendors don't understand when there are all these different playing fields why we are reluctant to move forward with this. So regardless of the complexity, we have always been able to find an alternative to work with our vendors, even when they have started from the position that it is a no-go and SIP is the only option. We've always found something different. One of the ways we do this is by working directly with the IT side. So our first point of contact is typically the sales team, but we find when we get down to the point of negotiating the authentication process, it's best for our IT teams to communicate directly. So now I'm going to talk about some of the alternatives that we've used for SIP. There are a whole bunch of different methods available, and we use about 5 or 6 different options. Ideally, we would like to standardize and only use one option, but at this point in time, we're still negotiating different authentication methods with different vendors. So the first alternative to SIP we use is proxy server. At our physical locations, we have static IP addresses. So what we do is just provide the vendor with a range of IP addresses that they can verify against when someone accesses the resource from in-house. This is really simple for us to do. Outside of the library, unfortunately, we have had to negotiate a range of other ways. Our most common approach right now is custom authentication, and I'm just going to talk at a really high level about these, but if you have more detailed questions, ask at the end or during the breakout session on privacy. So the first method we use is referring URL. This is where we have a portal where patrons can authenticate at our end, and then it creates a referring URL that sends the patron to the resource. When this isn't an option, we use XML authentication. Again, same process, we handle the authentication through a portal at our end, but then instead of a referring URL, an XML message is sent. We also use CAS or two-step authentication when we can. We really like CAS because it's a universal web standard, so lots of people know about it. It's used for authentication for other things. The problem is a lot of vendors are still not on board with this, and so it's something that we like to use, but it's not always an option. And then we use script authentication, which again is that we handle the verifying the PIN and barcode at our end, and then we use a script to send the user through. So it's a lot of different custom authentication methods to use, but we negotiate one-on-one with the vendor because we want to ensure we are meeting those privacy expectations. The final form of custom authentication we use is web services for Horizon. This is a newer option for us as it's just being introduced. And web services is a suite of tools available from Horizon that includes patron authentication. We really like this because we can just send the vendor to work directly with the API to define the information that they need to verify, and at our end, we can define the information that they can't have access to. So as I said, this is a newer service, and we haven't used it a lot yet, but it is something we would like to move towards because it links directly with our ILS. So yeah, that wraps up my overview to VPL's thoughts on SIP authentication and the issues with the privacy. I'll now pass you over to Scott, who will talk about the co-op's approach to managing these type of requests.
Thanks, Alyssa, and thanks for being a trooper and making it out when you're not feeling well. And also, thank you, VPL, for the leadership on this file. It's really appreciated. I think it's really important issues that they're raising. So. I don't have slides, speaking off the cuff. There was a comment made earlier, though, that I have to address, the issue that somehow ease of login and privacy are somehow incompatible or are trade-offs. This is a false binary. Absolutely. We can offer patrons like a simple way to get to things that is completely private. We need to bake this in by design. We're not. Right? This is not happening sector-wide, but we can. This needs to be an aspirational goal. In terms of authenticating the resources at the co-op, there's, I would say, 3 approaches we're offering. So we do, in fact, support the ability for vendors to authenticate with us via SIP. And there's two forms of that. So the first is a historic service we run called CAPA, the acronym of which is lost to time. But essentially, CAPA is an implementation of an open source server. And because we have access to the source code, we can decide what it responds on. And so we've essentially neutered it and said the only thing you can reply on is if presented with a patron barcode as a yes or no response. So you can't tell them the patron's email address or how many books they have checked out because you literally don't know that. And how do we get the patron barcodes? Well, on the back end of things, so we talk to, it's currently about 8 libraries. It used to be up to about 20, and it was a service that was started to help libraries whose ILS did not provide a SIP interface at all, and so this was created. And libraries can give us their set of valid patrons a number of ways. So we do talk to a number of their databases directly and just get an extract of just barcodes. So like run a report and give us, here are the barcodes that are of people who are allowed to check things out. We also accept comma separated value upload, so people will nightly just cron a file up to us. And again, so the server, when it gets a request from Overdrive or somebody else, it just looks in that file. It's like, are they in that file? Yes. Let them check it out? No, don't let them check it out. There's just no possibility to compromise privacy in this. So that's one, and you know, it looked like it was on its way out, but there's enough people who are having issues with this that we're actually have turned it back into a little service that we're willing to offer. So if you find yourself up against the wall of like, hey, I need to get this done, I don't have a way to do it, we're happy to provide that for you. With Sitka patrons, so Sitka does have also a SIP server, and if you're a Sitka patron, you get that. We are in the process of piloting that very same code against Sitka. So currently, right now, the Sitka server does respond with too much information, and we've got a pilot running to basically put that sort of neutered SIP server alongside it. So using SIP in-house in your library, you'll still get that response because you're talking to yourself essentially there. There's no privacy concern. Whereas if it's the vendors talking to that interface, again, they'll only get a yes or a no back. And then the last thing is that we run Easy Proxy. So similar to what Alyssa was mentioning. So Easy Proxy tends to be mostly popular in the post-sec world, but I'm assuming there are some publics who use it as well. And if you're not familiar, it's a proxy server that there's a number of ways you can configure it. It's actually kind of neat, but the primary way that we have it is with vendors who are requiring patrons to access resources from a specific IP block. So they have to be on campus, and essentially this allows them to either physically be on campus or else via the proxy service appear as if they're coming from on campus. And you can then tie that Easy Proxy back to the campus authentication system or, again, a list of barcodes, either works. So, yeah, in all three approaches, you know, our effort is to not provide any information, and the best way to do that is just literally not know it. I prefer not to know it because they can't force me to disclose it. So, happy to talk about this some more at the breakout. I guess the last pitch I would make, I really appreciated Alyssa's comment about the CAS server. That stands for Central Authentication Server. It was started as part of a special interest group online that got folded into the W3C, the standards body for the web. So, you know, great confidence that this is an open way that other people can use. And I would sort of urge libraries en masse to look at it and similar open web standards ways of doing this. Like, there is literally nothing you are doing on at your library that is library specific when it comes to authenticating to resources. Like, every other industry in the world has to do this. And guess what? They've mostly figured out ways of doing this that are web standards now. And it's time to get out of the boutique, our ILS only does this, and get into the, hey vendors, here's our standards compliant thing. You only need to do it once. You don't have to do it across ILSs anymore because there's a standard to do this too. So I would just put a plea out for that. Anyways, thanks.
you guys. Thanks, you guys.
I hope you feel better.